Last night, I created a video about A Court of Thorns and Roses. It was about the audiobook, not the actual book itself, because I absolutely love the book. It's an incredible series. I'm on to the second book, A Court of Mist and Fury, and I've got the whole series, so I'm excited to read it all. So, of course, once you get into something, your expectation is high surrounding that franchise, really. And like I say in the other video, I don't like criticizing other content creators, other creatives. It's one thing I try to steer away from. I never leave bad reviews, bad comments. I try, I try to be respectful. But I think sometimes something needs speaking upon, and unfortunately, in this situation, I felt this was the thing to talk about. Like I said in the other video, it was a case of I think people are too rash to hire people to produce like their story in another format. And this narrator that was chosen out of any narrator in the world, it's like it hasn't done the story justice. And I was reading through this morning. I thought I want to see if anyone else has the same feeling as me because this is just not right. It doesn't feel right, and I'll explain why it doesn't feel right in a minute. But everybody else is like glossing over within the review section of Audible. And then I come across someone who had pretty much the same opinion I had. And they've put, because they gave the story 5 out of 10, but the performance 1. And that's what I would have given it, 1 or 2. I'll try and be respectful. 2 would have just been because, the sound quality is good, and obviously they put the effort in. But it's, again, I'll get to the character in a minute to explain why I didn't like it. And I actually read the book on Kindle some years ago and also followed the series. It is by far the best book ever. A bit slow to start, but bear with it as it's amazing. Thought it'd be nice to hear this audible after all these years. Sadly, I can't get past the 4th chapter. I've now given up. The narrator has a dreadful nasal voice that slurs and seems to be all at one low down level, which simply drones on relentlessly. I just could not listen to it anymore. And it's like, that's how I felt. And it was, like, again, a big part of me doesn't like criticizing, so I tried to steer away from it. But every time I try and go anywhere near this book, I can't even get past the first stages of it, and that's so frustrating because it's not normally like that with audiobooks. But then it puts that, just for me, it puts off the entire series in audiobook. It's like, what a waste of potential. And it's like, I don't like criticizing, but at the same time, it's like, why put, it shouldn't have been in this situation in the first place. The person I have no doubt can do audiobooks in the right settings. She can do audiobooks, but this character required an awful lot of sensibility. You had to understand. It's almost like they never read the books to start with. That's how it feels. It feels like they took on the role and just read it as they saw it, and then they just carried on with that monotone. Without giving too much away, because it's early in the book anyway. You've literally got this female character who's got a father who has an injury, can't look after the family. You've got two younger siblings, like sisters. One is got a kind heart. The other one is more expects everything given to them, so they don't help out. Either way, this person, for instance, has to have the brunt of that family on their shoulders and their own survival. So they have to go out and hunt. It's the only way they're going to have food because they don't have resources. They're in poverty, so they're poor. And then things happen later on that send them on a different path. And effectively, they're trying to understand who they are in this world. So there's a feisty side where they're in survival mode, but also there's this sensibility where they're trying to discover who they are and what their life is supposed to be. And also there's this morality thing where you feel loyal to people around you, even though they don't really provide anything of substance to you. So you're the one doing everything, but you still feel bound to them. And again, it's obviously little nuances within that. And later on, they get gifts and they become powerful, but they're still trying to figure that out. And again, trying to have some sensibility. Now, with all that in mind, the level of detail this character portrays, and for me at least, there should be like a rawness to the character. It's definitely not light. I definitely don't feel a lightness with the character. And that's what bothered me the most. It was like, there's no way this narrator is ever showing any of that. And that's what pushed me over the edge. Because I thought if they had shown that rawness at all, even just a little bit, I could have got on it. But in no way is this audiobook portray any of that. And that's why that's why I took such an exception to it. So if we show it, now bear in mind all those sensibilities. Survival, trying to figure yourself out, and going on this journey in the end of discovery. I'm not feeling this at all.
Narrated by Jennifer Ikeda. Chapter 1. The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. I'd been monitoring the parameters of the thicket for an hour, and my vantage point in the crook of a tree branch had turned useless. The gusting wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Hunger had brought me farther from home than I usually risked, but winter was the hard time. The animals had pulled in, going deeper into the woods than I could follow, leaving me to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they'd last until spring. They hadn't. I wiped my numb fingers over my eyes, brushing away the flakes clinging to my lashes. Here there were no telltale trees stripped of bark to mark the deer's passing.
One thing I would say as well that I think I've missed there, the more I got through the story and I'm getting familiar with this character, is she becomes so endearing. I felt gravitated to her. I really wanted to, you could sense the flaws, and it was just like, you just wanted to cuddle them. And that's what I want to get across there. In no way do I feel that with this person. It's like superficial gloss. It just seems like there's nothing to the character. There's nothing of substance. It doesn't draw me in. It doesn't make me part of that character's life, So like I did in the other one, I'm going to do it. I did A Court of Mist and Fury because that's the book I'm on. But I'll do it from where she's reading. Now, again, I'm not a voice actor. I'm not even going to say I'm comparable to them. I'm not trying to be. I'm just going to show another reflection. And if I can do a half-decent job, just think what a professional could do, taking on that character and that story, and really just give it all that substance. That's just what bothers me, is that I can't go near the audiobook because there's no substance to the character. It's crazy. Chapter 1. The forest had become a labyrinth of snow and ice. I'd been monitoring the parameters of the thicket for an hour. My vantage point in the crook of a tree branch had turned useless. The gusting wind blew thick flurries to sweep away my tracks, but buried along with them any signs of potential quarry. Hunger had brought me farther from home than I usually risked, but winter was the hard time. The animals had poured in, going deeper into the woods than I could follow, leaving me to pick off stragglers one by one, praying they'd last until spring. They hadn't. I wiped my numb fingers over my eyes, brushing away the flakes clinging to my lashes. Here there were no telltale trees stripped of bark to mark the deer's passing. Hadn't yet moved on. They would remain until the bark ran out, then travel north past the wolves' territory, perhaps into the fairy lands of Prythian, where no mortals would dare to go, not unless they had a death wish. A shudder skittered down my spine at the thought. I shoved it away, focused on my surroundings, on the task ahead. That was all I could do, and all I'd been able to do for years. Focus on surviving the week, the day, the hour ahead. And now with the snow, I'll be lucky to spot anything, especially from my position up in the tree, scarcely able to see 15 feet ahead. Stifling a groan as my stiff limbs protested at the movement, I unstrung my bow before easing off the tree. The icy snow crunched under my fraying boots. I ground my teeth. Low visibility, unnecessary noise. I was well on my way to yet another fruitless hunt. Only a few hours of daylight remained. If I didn't leave soon, I'd have to navigate my way home in the dark. And the warnings of the town hunters still rang fresh in my mind. Giant wolves were on the prowl, and in numbers, not to mention whispers of strange folk spotted in the area, tall and eerie and deadly. Anything but fairies. The hunters had beseeched our long-forgotten gods, and I'd secretly prayed alongside them. In the 8 years we'd been living in our village, 2 days' journey from the immortal border of Prythian, we'd been spared an attack. Through travelling peddlers, sometimes brought stories of distant border towns left in splinters and bones and ashes. These accounts, once rare enough to be dismissed by the village elders as hearsay, had in recent months become commonplace whisperings on every market day. I'd risked much coming so far into the forest, but we'd finished our last loaf of bread yesterday, the remainder our dried meat the day before. Still, I would have rather spent another night with a hungry belly than found myself satisfying the appetite of a wolf. Or a fairy. Not that there was much of me to feast on. I turned gangly by this time of the year, and could count a good number of my ribs, moving as nimbly and quietly as I could between the trees. Pushed a hand against my hollow and aching stomach. I knew the expression that would be on my two elder sisters' faces when I returned to our cottage, empty-handed yet again. After a few minutes of careful searching, I crouched in a cluster of snow-heavy brambles. Through the thorns, I had a half-decent view of a clearing and the small brook flowing through it. A few holes in the ice suggested it was frequently used. Hopefully, something would come by. Hopefully. I sighed through my nose, digging the tip of my bow into the ground, leaned my forehead against the crude curve of wood. We wouldn't last another week without food, and too many families had already started begging for me to hope for handouts from the wealthier townsfolk. I'd witnessed firsthand exactly how far their charity went. I eased into a more comfortable position, calmed my breathing, straining to listen to the forest over the wind. The snow fell and fell, dancing and curling like sparkling spindrifts, the white fresh and clean against the brown and grey of the world. And despite myself, despite my numb limbs, I quieted that relentless, vicious part of my mind to take in the snow-veiled woods. Once it had been second nature to savour the contrast of new grass against dark, tilled soil, or an amethyst brooch lassoed in folds of emerald silk. Once I dreamed and breathed and thought in colour and light and shape. Sometimes I would even indulge in envisioning a day when my sisters were married and it was only me and father, with enough food to go around, enough food to buy some paint, and enough time to put those colours and shapes down on paper, or canvas, or the cottage walls. Not likely to happen any time soon. Perhaps ever. So I was left with moments like this, admiring the glint of pale winter light on snow. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done it, bothered to notice anything lovely or interesting. Stolen hours in a decrepit barn with Isaac Howe didn't count. Those times were hungry and empty, sometimes cruel, but never lonely. The howling wind calmed into a soft sighing. The snow fell lazily now in big fat clumps that gathered along every nook and bump of the trees. Mesmerizing. The lethal, gentle beauty of the snow. I'd soon have to return to the muddy, frozen roads of the village, to the cramped heat of our cottage. Some small, fragmented part of me recoiled at the thought. Bushes rustled against the clearing. Drawing my bow was a matter of instinct. I peered through the thorns and my breath caught. Less than 30 paces away stood a small doe. Not yet too scrawny from winter, but desperate enough to wrench bark from a tree in the clearing. A deer like that could feed my family for a week, or more. My mouth watered. Quiet as the wind hissed through dead leaves, I took aim. She continued tearing off strips of bark, chewing slowly, utterly unaware that her death waited yards away. I could dry half the meat. We could immediately eat the rest, stews, pies. Her skin could be sold or perhaps turned into clothing for one of us. I needed new boots, but Elaine needed a new cloak. Nesta was prone to crave anything someone else possessed. My fingers trembled. So much food. Such salvation. I took a steady, brave breath, double-checking my aim, but there was a pair of golden eyes shining from the brush adjacent to mine. The forest went silent. The wind died. Even the snow paused. We mortals no longer kept gods to worship. But if I had known their lost names, I would have prayed to them, all of them. Concealed in the thicket, the wolf inched closer, its gaze set on the oblivious doe. He was enormous, the size of a pony, and though I'd been warned about their presence, my mouth turned bone dry. But worse than his size was his unnatural stealth. Even as he inched closer in the brush, he remained unheard, unspotted by the doe. No animal that massive could be so quiet. But if he was no ordinary animal, if he was of Prythian origin, if he was somehow a fairy, and being eaten was the last of my concerns. If he was a fairy, I should already be running. Yet maybe it would be a favour to the world, to my village, to myself, to kill him while I remained undetected. Putting an arrow through his eye would be no burden. But despite his size, he looked like a wolf, moved like a wolf. Animal, I reassured myself. Just an animal. I didn't let myself consider the alternative, not when I needed my head clear, my breathing steady. I had a hunting knife and these arrows. The first two were ordinary arrows, simple and efficient, and likely no more than bee stings to a wolf that size. But the third arrow, the longest and heaviest, I'd bought from a travelling peddler during a summer when we'd have enough coppers for extra luxuries. An arrow carved from mountain ash, armed with an iron head. From songs sung to us as lullabies over our cradles, we all knew from infancy that fairies hated iron. But it was the ash wood that made their immortal healing magic falter long enough for human to make a killing blow, or so legend and rumour claimed. The only proof we had of the ash's effectiveness was its sheer rarity. I'd seen drawings of the trees, but never one with my own eyes. Not after the High Fae had burned them long ago. So few remained, most of them small and sickly and hidden by the nobility within high-walled groves. I spent weeks after my purchase debating whether the overpriced bit of wood had been a waste of money or a fake, and for 3 years the ash arrow had sat unused in my quiver. Now I drew it, keeping my movements minimal, efficient, anything to avoid that monstrous wolf looking in my direction. The arrow was long and heavy enough to inflict damage, possibly kill him, if I aimed right. My chest became so tight it ached. And at that moment I realized my life boiled down to one question. Was the wolf alone? I gripped my bow and drew the string further back. I was a decent shot, but I'd never faced a wolf. I'd thought it made me lucky, even blessed. But now? I didn't know where to hit or how fast they moved. I couldn't afford to miss. Not when I only had one ash arrow. And if it was indeed a fairy's heart pounding under that fur, then good riddance. Good riddance after all their kind had done to us. I wouldn't risk this one later creeping into our village to slaughter and maim and torment. Let him die here and now. I'd be glad to end him. The wolf crept closer. A twig snapped beneath one of his paws, each bigger than my hand. The doe went rigid. She glanced to either side, ears straining towards the grey sky. With the wolf's downwind position, she couldn't see or smell him. His head lowered, and his massive silver body, so perfectly blended into the snow and shadows, sank into its haunches. The doe was still staring in the wrong direction. I glanced from the doe to the wolf and back again. At least he was alone. At least I'd been spared that much. But if the wolf scared the doe off, I was left with nothing but a starving, oversized wolf, possibly a fairy, looking for the next best meal. And if he killed her, destroying precious amounts of hide and fat. If I judged wrongly, my life wasn't the only one that would be lost. But my life had been reduced to nothing but risks these past 8 years that I'd been hunting in the woods. And I picked correctly most of the time. Most of the time. The wolf shot from the brush in a flash of grey and white and black, yellow fangs gleaming. He was even more gargantuan in the open. A marvel of muscle and speed and brute strength. The doe didn't stand a chance. I fired the ash arrow before he destroyed much else of her. The arrow found its mark in his side, and I could have sworn the ground itself shuddered. He barked in pain, releasing the doe's neck as his blood sprayed on the snow, so ruby bright. He whirled towards me, those yellow eyes wide, hackles raised. His low growl reverberated in the empty pit of my stomach as I surged to my feet, snow churning around me, another arrow drawn. But the wolf merely looked at me, his maw stained with blood, my ash arrow protruding so vulgarly from his side. The snow began falling again. He looked and with a sort of awareness and surprise that made me fire the second arrow, just in case. Just in case that intelligence was of the immortal, wicked sort. He didn't try to dodge the arrow as it went clean through his wide yellow eye. Collapsed to the ground. Colour and darkness whirled, eddying in my vision, mixing with the snow. His legs were twitching as a low whine sliced through the wind. Impossible. He should be dead, not dying. The arrow was through his eye almost to the goose fletching. But wolf or fairy, it didn't matter. Not with the ash arrow buried in his side. He'd soon be dead. He'd be dead soon enough. Still, my hands shook as I brushed off snow and edged closer. Still keeping a good distance. Blood gushed from the wounds I'd given him, staining the snow crimson. He pawed at the ground, his breathing already slowing. Was he in much pain? Or was his whimper just his attempt to shove death away? Wasn't sure I wanted to know. The snow swirled around us. I stared at him until that coat of charcoal and obsidian and ivory ceased rising and falling. Wolf. Definitely just a wolf, despite his size. The tightness in my chest eased and I loosed a sigh. My breath clouding in front of me. At least the ash arrow had proven itself to be lethal, regardless of who or what it took down. A rapid examination of the doe told me I could carry only one animal, and even that would be a struggle. But it was a shame to leave the wolf. Though it wasted precious minutes during which any predator could smell the fresh blood, I skinned him, cleaned my arrows best I could. If anything, it warmed my hands. I wrapped the bloody side of his pelt around the doe's death wound before I hoisted her across my shoulders. It was several miles back to our cottage. I didn't need a trail of blood leading every animal with fangs and claws straight to me. Grunting against the weight, I grasped the legs of the deer, spared a glance at the steaming carcass of the wolf. His remaining golden eye now stared at the snow-heavy sky. And for a moment, I wished I'd had it in me to feel remorse for the dead thing. But this was the forest, and it was winter. I did the best I can. I got this freaking microphone right in my vision of the book, so sometimes I was struggling like crazy. Like I say, I'm not a voice actor, so I'm doing my best. Fortunately, in that situation, it's more monologue, which is good for me because that's where I shine. I am not so good with I try my best with the voices and stuff, and I will do my best with it, but really, I'm just better at doing the narrating. And I can't hear it back, of course. I've just bloody done it. But this is the difference, and I'm not sure if mine's better or not. But I tried to give some vulnerability, to the character, make it a bit more personable. But this is the official audiobook.
They hadn't yet moved on. They would remain until the bark ran out, then travel north past the wolves' territory and perhaps into the fairylands of Prithian, where no mortals would dare go, not unless they had a death wish. A shudder skittered down my spine at the thought, and I shoved it away, focusing on my surroundings, on the task ahead. That was all I could do. All I'd been able to do for years. Focus on surviving the week, the day.
She's too upbeat. It's too upbeat for me. There's too much positivity in her voice, even when she tries to be negative with feeling. I'm not getting it at all. Like I say, I'm not someone who likes to be critical of other creatives, but in this instance, I feel it's an opportunity missed, in all honesty. And I've noticed in that with a few of them. There was The Hobbit I tried listening to a long time ago, and it was so drab. And I was like, oh my God, this is just boring me to sleep. Then they did, I love Andy Serkis. You see his voice acting is incredible, but personally, I think his narration isn't. So he can do the voices incredible, but I think when it comes to, not dialogue, but when you're just doing you're describing things and you're just being the narrator, I don't think that's his strength at all. Because I think some people are they either bland or they over dramatize everything, and then that just gives you a headache because not everything's to be dramatized. Effectively, if you think of Morgan Freeman, I would say he's probably, if not one of the best. If you're going to talk about a narration, someone to tell a story, that's who you want. Andy Serkis, for instance, could do all the characters, and you'd have a whale of a time. And I think that's the thing. When someone tries to do all, you have to find a balance. Who can pull it off? And that's a rare talent. If someone can do the Morgan Freeman style, and then you can also do like an Andy Serkis playing all the characters. Effectively, Andy Serkis, the one that played Gollum, but he also does Planet of the Apes. He does all sorts, and he's like incredible. So you're going to go on a ride with this guy. But obviously, when you do an audiobook, someone has to do it all, and I think that's where the balance is hard. So I don't always think voice actors are the best either. So I think you can always say someone can do the voice, but can they narrate? That's the balance to be had, of course. But this one, I don't think has the ability to do that, and I think it's just ruined a series, weirdly enough. And it's a big statement to make, and it's not a nice one to make, I know. But it bothered me that much because I've read them. I want to read the whole series myself. Like I said, I've got the whole collection. It's just I'm on to the second book, but I've still got the others to do. And then I thought one day it'd be nice just to be able to sit down and chill and just listen to the audiobooks. But it's almost like now for myself, I don't even know how I would do it. But I'm even tempted now for myself to record the audiobook for me, create the files, and then rather than me having to read the pages, I can just lay back and I'll just listen to myself, tell myself the story. And these are things I may end up doing in my spare time at some point because I actually enjoy the process. I'm not saying I'm great, and it's definitely not sellable, I don't think. But for me, I actually enjoy it. It's like obviously hear my own voice in my head. But the difference here is mine is unedited. I'm reading it live. That's why a couple of times there was a slip with the words. But of course, I can barely see something sometimes. I don't know if you can't really see with the image. Let me see if I can take that down. The microphone's here, my book's here, and it's like I'm trying to read through the microphone a little bit. So I'm trying to go to the side a bit more, and it's like then the light, I lose the lighting. So I'm like trying to bend the book forward. That's how I'm having to read it sometimes. It's like, oh my God, this is hard. But I've changed things around. I've got to change things back. I'm going to have to sort of mess about, really, because I need the optimal position of the microphone so I can actually see in front of me. It's a whole process. And again, it's part of it is part of the process. So I'm not saying I'm a professional in any way. And it's just, I felt it's really important, I think, to elaborate a bit further, because I think some people are critical for the sake of being critical. And it doesn't do you any good, I think sometimes it's worth elaborating and telling exactly what the issue is to justify something rather than just be negative for the sake of negative. So I've got a phone call due very soon. That's why I sort of jumped. I was like, crap, time. I could lose time. I get so caught up in what I'm doing that time gets lost. And like I say, this isn't supposed to be an entirely negative video. It's more just raising awareness. That's kind of what I like to do. It's not a case of I'm trying to point someone out and say them by name or anything. It's just sometimes I think things have to be raised awareness. Otherwise, we just start to accept mediocrity as the standard. And it's like, what are we doing here? I don't get it. I just don't get it. There's enough people who can narrate, and it should be casted wide, really, to get the right people.